it's nice to have you on to talk about sort of the broader picture of what all of this means going forward, in Iran, Iranian society. But first, I guess just, Negar, your reaction to wanting, Steve Witkoff in Iran, about to make a deal, about to meet to talk about restarting the Iran deal, and striking 3 nuclear sites in the country, basically Israel's dream come true.
Right. So I think one thing that is clear here is that there's no strategy. Like, this is really happening. Well, on the U.S. side, there's definitely strategy on the Israeli side. And that strategy has been war, and they finally started it. But there was no strategy on the U.S. side. I mean, to begin with, to give nuclear negotiations a deadline of 60 days when the Iranians don't even trust the administration to come and sit at the table with them. I mean, looking back at the Obama era, President Obama, that administration was able to earn, sort of win the trust of the Iranians, sit at a table with world powers, not just US and Iran, with Russia, China, European powers, France, Germany, and the UK, and negotiate a nuclear deal that took 2 years. So to think that you can do something like that while you also unraveled it once, and I'm talking about the first Trump administration, who pulled out of the nuclear deal, then assassinated a top Iranian general. And then to think that you can go back to the table and negotiate something that complex in just 60 days. I mean, that's one thing. And then
so what you're saying is, like, diplomacy takes work. Is that what the implication is?
Hard work. So exactly. So, and this is not a joke, part of the reporting back then was that the top negotiators of Iran and the US and some of these parties are spending more time together in these rooms than with their own families. They would go into negotiations of, let's say, 18 hours of talks at a time. I used to cover this from Vienna, where they would go into that hotel and not come out for hours and hours and hours, reporters waiting there. It's tough work, and a lot of various different components and experts involved. So especially the US side would bring these like huge teams of experts, because we're talking about something very complex, a nuclear program, enrichment, levels, centrifuges, things that even who've been reporting it for 10 years still don't understand. Like, I rely on nuclear experts to explain this to me so that I can come and then explain it to a mainstream. But anyways, it was hard work. And then I think one thing that wasn't a secret was that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had been pushing for a US war in Iran, US attack on Iran, since the invasion of Iraq. This is no secret. I'm not making it up. He's been saying it in US Congress, all over, in public and private. The Israelis had been pushing for this war. So this is something he's wanted. We can't claim this came out of the blue. And then 2 days before the last round of Iran-US negotiations were scheduled to happen on Sunday, he goes for the attack, which I think more than destroying the nuclear program or military targets, etc. And I also want to talk about the civilian toll later on.
Yes.
I think the main target of that attack was nuclear diplomacy, was Iran and the US getting together to try to resolve this diplomatically. Benjamin Netanyahu has been trying to sabotage US-Iran diplomacy since the Obama years. Everything in his power he could do, even invited himself to the US Congress and gave a speech against Barack Obama, then president. He's tried to prevent it under Trump. He's tried to prevent it under Biden. And now in the past few months when talks started, he was trying to sabotage it every way he could. And I think he saw a window of opportunity to just start this conflict and eventually pull the US into it to make sure that diplomacy doesn't happen. And I think that was the main goal that was achieved here.
Right. Which is what Israel needed. I mean, that's the other question I have for you. I mean, I want to talk about maybe the new information about the damage that was or was not done to the nuclear sites. But I've heard other commentators say that this really will, because it did tank the possibility for negotiations, this will guarantee that Iran will most definitely will seek to develop a nuclear weapon, if only as a deterrent. What is your response? What do you think? And also, like, maybe just just poke a hole or point out how ridiculous it is, I guess, that Trump now is like, well, now peace. Well, now we're going to negotiate.
Right. So I think what happened here, what we saw happening is initially during the campaign, and then when he first came into office, President Trump was actually pretty consistent, saying that Iran just can't have nuclear weapons. And this was an acceptable term to the Iranians. And they said, okay, let's sit down and negotiate the terms of that. But then throughout the process of negotiations, I'm assuming because of pressure from certain interest groups, Israel, the neocons within his own party, because, there's MAGA and then there's the neocons who are the classic sort of foreign policy elite, always pushing for wars and conflict. I think throughout the course of these negotiations, those with that kind of power and pressure eventually came on top, and the goalposts started to move. So from no nuclear weapons, it moved to no enrichment and potentially no nuclear program. And enrichment for a civilian level has been something that's very important to Iran. It's been a red line. They've never agreed to it. They have been willing to fight it tooth and nail, and they say we have a declared nuclear program which is under the NPT, International Nuclear Safeguards, inspection monitoring. Why shouldn't we be allowed to enrich and have a civilian program? We will negotiate the levels and the stockpile and the percentage, et cetera, but we want to keep the civilian program and the enrichment. So it was a deal breaker. And then throughout the course of sort of this moving of the goalpost, I think what happened maybe is that there's this thinking that maybe if we push them, if we attack them and pressure them through force, they will eventually accept, if the program is not destroyed, that they will eventually accept a deal that they weren't able to accept, they weren't willing to accept. So I think a whole bunch of things happened here. First, a military attack on the nuclear programs, which experts had been saying it's impossible to destroy the program through just aerial bombardments. And right now reporting and intelligence leak is coming that, in fact, it wasn't destroyed and that the stockpile had been moved from that location beforehand. This is after even the U.S. strike. And then also,
is this the Forlan, the one in the big mountain?
Yes. So Fordo, Natanz, and outside Esfahan were the three main locations. And now the leak says that essentially the overall program, which is scattered across the country, was not destroyed. It was just set back by a few months. So the program wasn't destroyed. There was also chatter of regime change throughout this, especially by the Israelis, although the U.S. is pushing back on this being a regime change war. But then in the course of all of this, also a high civilian toll, especially on the Iranian side. I mean, on the Israeli side as well, but on the Iranian side, we just got health ministry data, 600 killed, 5,000 injured, many of them women and children. And then also millions of people displaced. We don't even know the numbers, but these evacuation orders come from the Israelis on social media, middle of the night, asking very large areas of civilians to just evacuate. And then President Trump posted on Truth Social one night that everyone from Tehran should evacuate. Tehran itself has more people than the entire country of Israel, a metropolis of 10 million people and children, disabled, sick, elderly. How do you evacuate in the middle of the night? So the lucky few who had cars, who found fuel. So fuel, you had to wait 5-6 hours in a gas station line just to fill up a tank and then get out of the city hours and hours in congested traffic. It's just mayhem and shock and terror. And then also a lot of people killed and injured in the course of, I don't even know what this is, because none of the desired goals were achieved.
Well, so that's. I mean, yes, that is more breaking news that the Fordo site was not destroyed; it was just damaged, and also the lie that these sites had nuclear weapons, right? Like even just that you see even the Chuck Schumers and, others sort of playing into like Iran is a imminent threat. And it's like, well, it's actually not. It's actually not. I don't know why we're sort of going with this imminent threat line when there is no actual evidence that these sites had nuclear weapons, right? And as you're saying, the goalposts of the Iran negotiations moving to include just energy or uranium enrichment writ large, which was never actually on the table in the original Iran deal. I mean, there really is nothing that Iran could do to satisfy the United States other than, I mean, yeah, just saying, okay, no energy whatsoever. You get to determine our energy policy in this country. But just in terms of where Israel's striking, can you, like 600 civilians killed, where are they targeting? Because are these, clearly this is more than just these nuclear sites that are ostensibly remote, but maybe, maybe talk about where the strikes have been landing.
Sure. Let me first just add to what you were saying. This is not Iranian intelligence or Israeli intelligence, parties to the conflict. This is U.S. intelligence as late as last week, Trump administration intelligence saying, no, it is not a weapons program. It is still a civilian nuclear program, and they have not made the decision to weaponize, even though they have acquired enough material that can potentially one day be used if they decide to build a bomb, and then that bomb has to be launched, put on something that needs to. So there are a lot of ifs here, but U.S. intelligence, this is not Iranian saying we did it. And then the other lie that we hear a lot in the media, or the falsehood, is that Iran was cheating under the Obama nuclear deal, which is not true. Again, State Department under the first Trump administration also, time and again, and then under Obama, reported that Iran is abiding by the terms of the nuclear deal. Well, they didn't like the deal because it was made by the previous guy who was a Democrat, and then the president came. And that's not the world's problem when the country goes and signs and makes a deal and shakes hand, and then the party changes and all of a sudden you don't like what the previous one did. This is not how you can do international relations, but apparently now that's the case in the US. But anyway, so these were sort of the two main disinformation sort of clouds that were created and perpetuated by the reporting. And then on top of all of this, looking at the big picture, or sort of the elephant in the room, is the only country in the region who has actual nuclear weapons, Israel. It's an undeclared program. It's not under international safeguards. They're not a signatory to the NPT. They don't even acknowledge that they have it. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. And the media reporting also goes with this. It's not just in the political discourse, it's also very much lax in the media reporting. So you ask an average person who in the Middle East has a nuclear program, chances are they're going to tell you Iran. And this is a result of this kind of reporting. As far as what's being held,
well, just on the Israel having nukes, I mean, it's like, just from the last 18 months, 20 months of genocide, every accusation is a confession. Everything, the human shields line when Israelis are using Palestinian prisoners as shields on top of tanks, or like, the beheaded babies. Okay, well, that never happened, but there are infants being murdered by Israeli strikes. I mean, just the endless accusation of the other to demonize them. And then you see Netanyahu's line over the last 30 years, is Iran's just a month away from a nuke, and you're like, buddy, I'm pretty sure you're a month away from a nuke. Like, I'm pretty sure you guys have the nuke, like, of all the places. And that means they're not party to the NPT. The IAEA has not inspected Israel, right? There's no agreement. And I believe under international law, the US would not be able to fund Israel should it have nukes that were undeclared or not party to the NPT. Like, we wouldn't be able to support, obviously, forget supporting a country that's doing genocide or doing these acts of war, on sovereign nations like Iran and Lebanon, but we wouldn't be able to fund them because they've got a nuke. So anyway, just a finer point on the Israel has nukes line. Back to Iran.
Yeah, and then as far as your question on what's been attacked, so initially this was framed as a preemptive strike on Iran, and preemptive has connotations in international law. Preemptive is when you realize an enemy is about to imminently attack you, or imminent danger, and you figure it out and you go for it first to prevent that attack. They haven't produced the evidence of the imminent attack, which is the nuclear bomb that the Iranians haven't built yet, let alone to decide to launch it against Israel. So it wasn't a preemptive attack. And they framed it as an attack on Iran's nuclear program. It wasn't just a nuclear program. It also came with targeted assassinations of Iranian military, Iranian nuclear scientists. And these are people who were sleeping at night in their homes with their families in civilian areas. We've seen images of entire apartment buildings destroyed, or if there was one unit in an apartment, about 20 units all around it have been impacted and destroyed. Gas leaks and fire spreads, people get killed, cars get destroyed on the street, car bombs were set off in some of these assassinations, drones have been flying, there are internal stations Israel has infiltrated, and there have been internal sort of attack stations across the country with explosives and etc. And so it's been a real, and then just in the past 2 days, and including after the quote-unquote ceasefire, there have been real heavy attacks in some areas, especially Tehran, which prompted, again, people to try to flee as much as they can. Some are even leaving the country. The airspace has been closed. People are leaving through land borders or at least leaving Tehran, yeah.
Where are people going?
Well, to neighboring countries wherever you can. So Iran has borders with Armenia, Turkey, Iraq, although the Iraqi airspace has also been closed because Iraq is on the way of these two countries basically shooting over it and Israeli planes going over it, which the Iraqis are also not happy about, but they also have no control over Israeli jets basically going over their sky and attacking another country. But it's basically impacted not just Iran and Israel, but the region, but then also, of course, the civilian toll on the Israeli side and the horror of running to shelters and all of that is something I want to acknowledge. But the numbers on the Iranian side are very high, and it certainly wasn't just an attack on the nuclear program or military targets.
Right. And right now, just looking at the, breaking news that Israel's warning that their campaign isn't over. They're far from ending, these attacks on Iran. I'm assuming Iran is not about to stop either. And here was Trump this morning. We saw this, right? And it's been a couple hours now. But, Trump thought that his Truth Socials, if he just, tweeted in all caps, things like, Israel, don't drop those bombs. If you do it, it's a major violation. Bring your pilots home. And this is like 6:50 in the morning. And he even signed it his name, like the actual grandpa that he is, just like signing his own text messages. So he clearly knew that Israel was about to, continue bombing Iran. And then he got pretty pissed at it because he thought there was a ceasefire and he could be Mr. Ceasefire.
Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I've never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. When I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
Ooh, he used the F word. There's Trump actually pissed off. It sounds like he didn't get the memo that Israel's just gonna do whatever it wants, and you got played, my man. But is there even any truth into what he's saying in terms of like, I made a deal in the ceasefire and they did, like, can you translate what he's saying at all, Negar?
Yes. So, at the end of the day, he's still president of the United States, potentially the most powerful person on earth. Yeah. So everything he does, tweet or Truth Socials. I was talking to family in Tehran when that evacuation order for Tehran came, and they're like, is this serious? I was like, I don't know. There's 50% chance it isn't. There's also 50% chance this is the president of the United States. So how about you take it seriously and leave the city? But yeah, it's real lives we're talking about here. I think what the reporting that we're hearing, and also back channels, is that mediators, especially through Qatar, who is a friend to both Iran and the US, and also they took the attack of Iran's retaliation because there's a US base there. In fact, that friendship led to that attack, to them hosting the attack as well. But they helped mediate a sort of a ceasefire, which obviously Israel, as they have been violating ceasefires in Gaza, is going to violate, and they did. And there was one Iranian, the rocket he's talking about is an Iranian rocket. I think it was by mistake. It's still not clear, but one Iranian rocket was also shot after the ceasefire, and it didn't hit anything. But the Israelis came out with a very heavy bombardment after he announced the ceasefire, and it looks like he's very pissed. And let me just go back to the big picture here. Look, he campaigned on a campaign of peace. He literally called himself the president of peace. He thinks he deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. He's been asking for it.
Yes, he does.
He said he's going to bring peace to Ukraine and Russia. He said he's going to bring peace to the Middle East. Well, Ukraine and Russia, peace didn't happen. Gaza didn't happen. In fact, it got worse. And now there's another war starting under his watch. And what are we at? June yet? It's not even 6 months, almost 6 months. And a third war started. So yes, the American public does not have an appetite, no interest for another big regime change war in the Middle East. And they understood that. This administration and the campaign understood that. That's actually one of the reasons they won, because of that anti-war message. And it's ironic that he's been criticizing, even mocking past presidents for either wanting to start a war with Iran or be about to start a war. There was a clip, I think even on CNN, now this is being shown, of how many times he's criticized other presidents and accused them of wanting to start a war with Iran. Well, he's the one who did it. And now I feel like they're trying to backtrack it and go back into the president of peace mode and this administration of peace. And I just don't know if the Israelis are going to let that happen, essentially going back to the negotiating table.
Well, let's talk about where things go from here, right? Because this has been, I mean, they're divergent views of what the future holds, right? Trump and Hegseth and Marco Rubio and JD Vance are out there saying this is not about regime change. This is about 3 strikes. We did it. We got them. You're welcome, world. Peace accomplished. I don't know what they think day 2 or day 3 or even year 2 or 3 or month 2 or 3 even looks like after saying all that. But Israel has always had very clear regime change goals when it comes to Iran. Maybe can you just explain the why around that? I'll go first and say great distraction if you want to take over the West Bank completely and completely kill all the people in Gaza. Perfect way to not talk about Palestinians. But why else is regime change the goal of Israel?
Well, because, you know, they see that, or have propped up also to some extent, Iran as the main enemy. I mean, it is true that Iran and Israel are arch enemies in the region. They're big rivals. Both are regional powers, although one of them has the support of the world superpower and wouldn't have this kind of supremacy over everyone else in the neighborhood if it wasn't for U.S. material and financial support over the years, diplomatic cover, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, this has been also sort of a career goal of Benjamin Netanyahu, to try to either attack or start a war or sabotage and potentially even bring regime change to Iran. And you've seen it in public statements and also in the sort of actions or the cycles of these attacks. Something's happened over the past week since the war started. They hacked the Iranian state television and put out these messages to the Iranian people, reminding them of how repressive the regime is, which is true, and how much they hate it, which is also true, and then expecting them to rise up and, you know, bring down the regime and your own revolt, while people were actually running away from the same government, from Israeli bombs coming down on cities, on the homeland, and on some homes. We've really seen, I wouldn't say a rally around the flag as in supporting the government, but a sense of unity has been created. Right. And we see anti-war messaging echo from Iran because of the fact that they see an attack on the homeland, on their homes, on their sovereignty. And people are saying, no, we don't want these freedom bombs. This is not how you bring democracy and better governance. And, all of the criticism that they've had for the repressive domestic state of their country, they're saying this is not the way. Don't put us between a rock and a hard place and then keep pressing, thinking that we're going to be happy about it. And we're also hearing this echo statements of the political opposition, civil society, and many of the people who've been active sort of in opposition to the government internally.
Yeah, I mean, what is the response to, because we, last time you were on, we talked about the immense amount of restraint that Iran had shown up until this point. I mean, the sort of symbolic retaliation after the killing of Ismail Haniyeh in the Syrian embassy in Tehran, like that was hugely provocative. And so it's always sort of been squarely on Iran to, well, you guys have to be the bigger man here, even though these are the bigger militaries. But yeah, maybe just talk more about the internal discussions. Obviously, it is terrifying to have Netanyahu tell your country. I mean, even if it were like this, if it were this country, which he basically did when Obama was president, which was like, this is not really the president, guys. OK, your president sucks. Let's wait for a guy like Trump, even with Biden. Oh, yeah. Oh, he's going to be nice to him. But this is not really the guy that I want. But for Netanyahu to tell the Iranian people, rise up and get rid of your leader. And again, the apparent alleged assassination attempt plans on Ayatollah Khamenei and which were, I guess, not part of what Trump and the administration wanted to do. I guess, yeah, what does this mean for what happens when these attacks happen on Iranian civil society? Like you're saying, it's less rally around the government and more rally around with one another. What does that look like? Say more about that.
So I want to be fair, and also there is a lot of criticism against the government. There is huge opposition inside the country to the government, political, economic, social, even cultural grievances that people have that haven't been addressed. But at the same time, this is not how freedom comes. This is not how those grievances have been addressed. And I think even for part of that sort of activist community who thought this may be a good opportunity, after the past 10 days, now they've been more clear-eyed, understanding that, okay, this is not how, a better future comes for the country. People also see the experiences of Iraq and Afghanistan, sort of these regime change wars, and how it brought more instability, insecurity, and conflict and chaos to the region. So it doesn't mean that they're rallying around their government and that they love their government and that they don't want it to change its behavior or potentially change at all. But it also means that they don't want, while they're dealing with this repressive system, they don't want to also be bombed from the skies. I mean, I don't know why that's so hard to understand for the mainstream, and we have to keep explaining this to everyone, and it's just coming as such a big surprise that people don't like to be bombed from the sky. What a big surprise! So I think,
or the idea that taking out a leader and replacing them with your handpicked person is the way to go. That has been done in Iran by the United States before, and taking out Mossadegh, right? And installing the Shah, and then you get the Iranian Revolution. And so this is, again, we're like history repeating. Forget 2003 and the Iraq War. This is more on the nose than that when it comes to Iran. And yes, the first time you were on this show, Negar, was when you talked about the women life freedom movement and how inspiring it was and how incredible it was. And when did that movement? I mean, I'm very much of the mind that the more emboldened hardliners are, whether in the United States or in Iran, the less space there is for real social movements to actually flourish. and again, not trying to play into sort of the U.S. orchestrating any of that, or trying to support, dissident groups, which, by the way, we know is already happening, but just writ large, like that is the trend. Like when you're being bombed from the sky, yes, you cannot organize a liberatory feminist movement so easily.
Exactly. And I think one thing that I like about the civil society and sort of the larger population is the fact that they want peaceful change, that they want peaceful, even if it's a transition or whatever. The word peaceful is always echoing, and against that, sort of the statements that are anti-war. Now, a lot of people also criticize their own government for their long-term strategy and policy and posturing in the region for sort of bringing this animosity to it. They're saying, we should have been more careful in dealing with the US, in dealing with Israel, with the West, et cetera, et cetera. But that doesn't mean that they see this sort of foreign attack and potentially invasion of their homeland, of their cities, of their homes as legitimate. One doesn't justify the other. And being stuck, even for the most anti-regime opposition, this situation is being stuck between a rock and a hard place, to put it mildly. And then also this has rallied some support for the government because people see the state as their only defender, as the only one who's going to protect them against these bombs that are coming from the sky. And so, the dynamic didn't really turn out as some had imagined and expected it to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question is, we sort of left this ball bouncing, but one thing I've heard Trita Parsi say multiple times now is that Iran's most definitely going to seek a nuclear weapon. What are your thoughts on that? And what do you feel like, what happens from here? And what do you hope happens?
Well, it's a possibility. We don't know. But if that does happen, we can certainly thank Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump for it, because the Iranians had been warning that if their nuclear program, which is civilian, if it gets attacked, then they're going to pull out of that NPT, out of that international safeguards, which they may very well do. And then this can open the door for more clandestine, underground, undeclared activity that can potentially one day be a weaponized program. And so if that does happen, we will know that this is what gave them the reason to do it, and sort of that change or shift in the policy. So that's certainly a big danger. And then also just, normalizing this sort of behavior and atmosphere of attacking nuclear material, the toxic
this is what I was going to ask.
Radiation, yes. Environmental
nobody's asking
health.
This question. Yes.
Yeah, some international organizations, UN agencies had been warning, but that's just not heard through the noise of all the, hyped up, whatever. Like, when did this become normal for countries to just casually attack nuclear material and nuclear programs, and for the Iranians to scramble to get it out of that place to God knows to what place? There's all the issue of safety and how this is all being handled.
Like just like the danger that poses. Yes, the cost, the cleanup, the pollution, but also the like that. If I know it's hard for Americans to imagine if that happened to us, but if like our nuclear, site in Colorado or something were attacked, that would be an act of war. Even if it were about like a warhead or not, doesn't matter. It would be an act of war that is incredibly violent. To do that, I think, that's the question. I'm like, hey, what happens when you bunker buster bomb a nuclear site? I'm sure it's all fine. Nothing like Fukushima, nothing like Chernobyl, right? Like, nobody knows. Well, they know. It's awful.
It's awful, yeah. So I'm still waiting for more independent reporting, but if the Iranians had moved the material, which seems to be the case, then at least maybe that threat doesn't exist. But it could very well be a threat. And then also, like I'm saying, normalizing this for the long term, all this talk of rules-based international order, the various conventions, sort of the system that the U.S. was a leader to put in place in the world for certain things to not happen. And all of them have been happening in front of our eyes in the past 2 or so years, with war crimes, with genocide, ethnic cleansing, dehumanizing, going for civilians, bombing hospitals, attacking journalists while they're alive on air and things like that. To normalize that, it's just astonishing, and it seems to be the new norm.
What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/bitchuation room. Do